alright. Ha o lalet sa bahaula. Everything will be alright. Komonate motumelong. Great. Thank you. So, when I asked how many of you were here last year, many of you raised your hands. Do any of you remember what I talked about? Yeah, that too. What did I talk about last year? Who was that guy? Oh, wow. Do you remember what I said? What? Be not, oh my gosh, get a mic to these people. Where are the MCs? mic. So what did we talk about? Because I want to talk about that again. Do you think we finished the discussion last year? No. We only got started, right? And so much has happened in the world since then. You know, a few years ago, the Universal House of Justice commissioned a book called Century of Light. How many of you know Century of Light? Oh, good. It's very good. And in that Century of Light, the House of Justice identifies two forces in the world. One force is what brings us all together, and the other force is what pushes us apart, right? So some things bring us together, and some things pull us apart. And that is why it's such an exciting time to be alive, and it's so exciting to be a youth in this day. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the forces that pull us apart, because those are easier to identify, aren't they? Okay, can you tell me some things? MCs, I want you to be walking around. Oh, do I have your other mic? Sorry. Oh, no, they have another one. Raise your hands, and they'll just come to you. What are some things that pull us apart as humanity? Right here in the front. Racism. Okay, we'll talk about that. Back there. War.
Backbiting.
Good girl. That's always the hard one, isn't it?
The triple gods of nationalism, racialism, and communism.
All right, somebody has read The Guardian.
Religious fanaticism.
Okay. What else? Here's one in the front.
Anyism.
Anyism. Is that what you said? Mm-hmm. It's okay, speak up. This is your chance. What is it? Fear?
Fault finding.
Fault finding.
Materialism.
Very good. In front here.
Not understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Men and women, sometimes they'll separate men and women.
Men and women.
Yeah.
Inequality between men and women.
Inequality of men and women.
Mm-hmm. Disunity in all its forms, right? Ego. Wow.
Ignorance.
You know, I saw a bumper sticker one time at a time when the country was cutting back on education funding, and it said, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance.
Extremes in wealth and poverty. Being greedy.
Mm-hmm. Injustice. Take a couple more.
Ignorance.
Ignorance. Another one, ignorance.
Hatred.
Hatred.
Dishonesty.
Dishonesty.
National or regional pride.
There's more hands.
Politics.
Terrorism.
Terrorism. So all of these things, there's somebody with a blue sweater right there.
Close-mindedness.
You see, these are all the forces that pull us apart. And we're all very familiar with them. You know why? Because from the moment we wake up in the morning until we go to bed at night, we're exposed to them in one form or another. And if you do not have a clear understanding of the teachings of Baha'u'llah about the future, what would your reaction be to all these things that you named? Terrorism, ignorance, racism. What would your response to those things be? How would you react to them? Distress, depression, alienation, right? Anger, fear, isolation. Those are all, imagine if you did not have, put yourself in a place where you know nothing about the future of humanity. All you know is what you see on the news and what you read in the papers and what you hear people talking about. Imagine the degree of distress that you would live with. And yet, the House of Justice spoke to you, the youth of this generation. And this is what they said to you. And this is, many of you know I'm obsessed with a particular letter. Do you know what letter that is? May 24th, 2001. And why am I obsessed with it? It's what? Because it speaks to the youth. And this is what the House of Justice says. Humanity's crying need will not be met by a struggle among competing ambitions or protest against one or another of the countless wrongs afflicting a desperate age. Okay? What does that mean? How are people trying to resolve the issues? All those issues that you named. What are some of the ways they're trying to resolve them? Competition with each other, right?
Organized protests.
Organized protests. And we've seen those, the WTO, anti-globalization demonstrations. Have you seen them all? And while their goals may be fine, were they able to resolve any of the issues that they're most concerned about? What are they concerned about? Hold on, there's somebody right here.
They're looking for the one who's guilty.
Okay, first of all, they're trying to find someone who's guilty. But what are their concerns? What are the things they're concerned about? Human rights. Are we concerned about human rights? What else are they concerned about?
Social justice and the environment.
Social justice and the environment. Are we concerned about social justice and environment?
Yes.
Okay. What else are they concerned about?
Everyone's safety.
Everyone's safety.
Basically, if there's going to be like another war or something, or, like prejudices and everything.
So they're worried about wars, whether they're happening in the Sudan, whether they're happening in Iraq, wherever they're happening, they're concerned about war. Right? Are we concerned about war? But the House of Justice says that all of those things cannot be resolved by competing and confronting each other. They go on to say, it calls rather for a fundamental change of consciousness, for a wholehearted embrace of Baha'u'llah's teaching that the time has come where each human being on earth must learn to accept responsibility for the welfare of the entire human family. So how do we resolve those very same issues that we are very concerned about? We're concerned about the state of the environment. We are concerned about social injustice. We are concerned about the extremes of wealth and poverty. We are concerned about the decline of education. We are concerned about racism. We're concerned about all these things. But what does the house say? How do we address those? What does it call for? A fundamental change of what? What is consciousness? Thinking, being aware, belief, and ultimately action. Right? Because you can think all these things and feel all these things and read all the Baha'i writings you want to read. But if you just sit in your home and do nothing about it, is it a fundamental change of consciousness? You've only done what? You have acquired knowledge. But in this day and age, knowledge without action is useless. So as the weekend goes on, as you go into your workshops, what I really want you to do is I want you to think about how does a fundamental change of consciousness affect what you do and how you live your life? Because you are part of a new generation. A generation for the first time since the 1960s and early 70s is interested in change and is socially conscious. You had a couple generations there who were self-absorbed and only thought of themselves. You are now of a changing generation. So you read all these things, but if you don't act on them, the knowledge by itself isn't going to be meaningless. So how do we take responsibility for every human being on earth? What are some of the ways in which we do that?
Including the United States sent money to them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the tsunami, actually, this particular catastrophe has been, there have been more contributions for that than any other. But you know the one that touched me the most? And this is where you can see how we have become such a closely integrated world. Remember a year ago or so, there was a little town in Russia where these terrorists took over a school, and then several children and their families died. Remember that town in Russia? When they heard about the tsunami, they suspended their own pain and anguish long enough to raise money to send to the tsunami victims. To me, that was one of the greatest confirmation of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, that the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. That those people were able to suspend their own pain long enough to think about somebody else's pain clear across the world. So the tsunami was a great lesson, yes.
Pioneering in years of service?
I'm sorry?
Going on pioneering in years of service?
Pioneering and year of service. I just returned from Guyana, where there is a bunch of Canadian youth who are there doing Youth Year of Service. And their contribution is so phenomenal. They are doing literacy classes. They're teaching the arts to these children, incredibly poor neighborhoods. And so many of these children are coming to Baha'i classes, and their parents are now saying, my child is learning to read, but I can't read. So they're starting adult literacy activities, and those kids are only there for a year. They're not going to solve Guyana's problems, but the contributions they make in action is something that those people will remember for the rest of their lives. So pioneering and year of service, that's how you show responsibility. Yes?
Basically also taking into account each day our actions and trying to teach the cause of the faith and trying to see if we could help the world to become a better place.
Be conscious. Be alive. Think and feel. Don't let these years go by in a state of unconsciousness. And you live in a society that tries to drug you, make you drowsy, make you a consumer, so that you spend your life, these few years go by, and next thing you know, you're 30 years old, you're married with 5 kids, and Lord have mercy. Is there someone else? Do I see hands?
Transforming the inner character.
Transforming the inner character. There is one person in the entire universe over whom you have some control. Who's that? Absolutely, right? You cannot change another person. You can't do anything about their behavior, but you can do something about somebody.
Taking responsibility for yourself first and always asking.
And how do you do that? How do you take responsibility for yourself?
Ask yourself, what would Abdul Baha do?
Okay, that's...
Reflect.
And to have spiritual discipline, right? You hear that word thrown around. When you go to your workshops, I want you to talk about that. Yes?
If you cannot teach through words, teach through action.
Okay, and how do you do that?
If someone is backbiting near you, just walk away or tell them that you don't want to participate in that and that it's wrong to talk about people behind their backs because it hurts them if they accidentally hear it.
I did a workshop with some junior youth a couple years ago in Seattle. And so I told them, let's talk about any topic that you want to talk about. And they said, we want to talk about gossip and backbiting. These are all junior youth. And I said, why do you want to talk about that? And they said, because it's all around us. It's in our home, it's in our school, it's with our friends. Everywhere we go, there is gossip and backbiting. And so they wanted to dissect it and say, if I say this about somebody, is it backbiting? So Baha'u'llah says the most grievous of all sins is what? What does that mean? The what? Microphones. People with microphones, where are they?
Raise your hand. Where are you?
They're raising their hands right there.
That which causes the most grief.
The most grief. Nothing is worse than that. Right? But often, when you hear us talk, we're more concerned about, is this one drinking? Is that one sleeping around? Is this one drinking? That doesn't mean those things are not bad. But Baha'u'llah says the most grievous of all sins is backbiting. Right? So, and who can control that? The first person to control it is the speaker, right? And the second person to control it is the listener. So the speaker can control it and the listener can control it. I worked, I do management training, and I was working this one company, and in the course of one of the debriefs, they said one of the things they noticed that this person that they identified, who's a Baha'i, who works in their company, they said, when we see that person come to the break room, we all stop gossiping. Because that we know that that person finds it intolerable. So this person doesn't have to say anything. But the moment she walks in, their behavior changes. That's what you can do for your peers. So when you walk up to a group of people, they will say what? Better stop. Because he or she does not like that. That's how you take responsibility. And then the House of Justice goes on. Must take responsibility. Commitment to this revolutionizing principle will increasingly empower individual believers in Baha'i institutions alike in awakening others to the day of God and to the latent spiritual and moral capacities that can change this world into another world. Okay, so commitment to what? What is the House of Justice talking about? Commitment to something.
The faith?
Yeah, but they talk about something very specific I just read.
Maybe to the writings?
The oneness of humanity?
The fundamental
Change of
consciousness that the time has come when every human being must take responsibility for the welfare of the entire human family. Being conscious of that and committing yourself to that by itself will change this world into another world. Remember the video you just saw about this world? Earlier, I think prior to the devotions? That is the world you live in and the world that you described. So now let's talk a little bit about what are those forces that bring us together. Remember you listed a whole bunch of things about the things that pull us apart.
Faith.
Faith. Okay, in what way does faith, because remember somebody said one of the things that pulls us apart is religion or religious intolerance. How does faith pull us together?
It brings us all to one point.
Okay.
Knowing that nothing can widen the gap, that everything, no matter what, will bring us together.
So faith has the power to bring us together. And Baha'u'llah says that don't make religion a cause of discord. Right? And so as Baha'is, we have to be incredibly open to other people's beliefs and faith and not be threatened by it. Right? Because we know it is the will of God for humanity to come together in this age. So we cannot use faith as a source of disunity. In fact, I sometimes think that this is just Becky Murphy, this is not in the Baha'i writings. Because I know somebody's going to go out here and say, Becky said. But I think that people who are atheists are much more in compliance with the will of God than people who have religion and use it for the sake of disunity. Because Baha'u'llah says religion should be the cause of unity. If there is no unity, it's better to have no religion. So in one way, maybe atheists are more in compliance with the will of God than people who have religion and kill people and cause disunity. One time we were teaching a group of people, and they actually came into a Baha'i meeting, and they were in the back of the room, and a speaker was speaking. And when I walked into the room, they were speaking really loudly. And I said, why are you talking so loudly? And they said, well, we just want to know what this is about. I says, well, why don't we go out into the hallway and talk about it? So we went out into the hallway and we were talking, and it was such a contentious discussion. We said, you know what, it doesn't look like we're getting anywhere, so maybe we can just say a prayer and go our separate ways. So they said, okay, let's say prayer. So we stood in a circle, and my husband said the unity prayer. And then one of them started speaking in tongues. I'd never heard anybody speak in tongues until then. And so they said their prayer, and when they were done, they said to us, well, we didn't feel anything when you said your prayer. I said, oh, that is a real helpful attitude, isn't it? And we told them, really, if you really think we're so misguided and really dislike us, you should do what Christ said you should do as Christians. And that is to love your enemies and pray for us. And we left. And a long time later, we ran into one of the people, and they said, you know, the fact that you guys didn't argue back with us was the biggest spiritual lesson for us. Because you could have argued, you could have been nasty about it, but because you guys didn't, to this day, there's a part of me that is attracted. Because you chose unity. You see, so faith can be a strong point of unity if you use it well. What else? What other things bring us together? Think about the world you live in. Somebody here from Japan? She's not in the room right now. Go ahead.
Love?
Love. How does love bring us together? Come on. Think. I know it's early. Hugs. I'm a great hugger. Firm believer in that.
Also, loving someone is accepting them.
Accepting them, no matter what in all their idiosyncrasies, right? Because it's always easy to love the lovable, isn't it? The lovable are real easy to love.
Marriage.
Marriage, definitely.
Discovering the truth.
Discovering the truth. How does that promote love?
It brings us together by if we look into questions, like if we have a question about the faith and we look into the writings, we can become more unified.
Very good.
Discovering the truth.
Go ahead.
Education.
Wow. Education. Because, the most elementary of education is just the sharing of information. In the Caribbean countries, there is a real sad thing happening. The United States, Canada, and the UK have a great shortage of teachers and nurses. And so they go to these countries, these English-speaking countries, and they siphon off the best teachers and nurses those countries have, actively. So the education in these countries just continues to decline. And one of the things I really encourage Baha'i youth to do as a service is to go to those countries like over your summer vacations when you're in college and so on, and do literacy programs and education programs to make up. That is a good way for you to take responsibility. Not necessarily even to go and live there. But imagine like those Canadian youth who are there for a year, look at the difference they make in the lives of those children. Because education in the 21st century and beyond is a key to accessing anything you want. Even in this country, later on the House of Justice talks about how the world that you're inheriting is one that is unjust and unbalanced. So one of the ways you can help bring it together is through education.
Having a greater sense of humility than pride, because it's easier to let people in and to get to know, people's situations better as opposed to just assuming things.
say the last part. You swallowed the
And
last
to let people in as opposed to just assuming things about people.
openness.
Yes.
And I've told you a story. When I was traveling in Kenya, I met this man. And he said, he'd become a Baha'i as a youth. And he's Kenyan, and he was going to school in Uganda. And when he was going to school there, he had a friend who was a Baha'i. And one day they were returning home to Kenya, and this friend says, I want to go to such and such a part and say goodbye to a friend. And he goes, that's like the white part of town. And he says, are you sure you know somebody who lives there? He says, oh, yeah, I know somebody who lives there. I have to go and say goodbye to them before I return to our country. So they start walking, and then he said, are you sure you know somebody who lives in this neighborhood? He said, yeah, I know, really, don't worry about it. So then he said, I thought, it must be like some servants who work in the house. That must be who he knows. So they arrive, and the man walks up the front of the house. And this fellow says, no, I'm going to stand across the street. I don't want to watch you get killed. He says, no, really, don't worry about it. Come. I said, I wouldn't go. So he said, I stood back across the street. And this man walked to the door, and he rang the doorbell, and the door opens, and this woman, welcomes him. White woman embraces him, welcomes him, and then her husband comes and they embrace him, and he hears them talking, pointing at him, because he's telling them, my friend won't come. And so the husband starts walking down the steps, and he opened his arm to him, and he says, and he put his arms around me, and he says, I was as stiff as a board. I had never been hugged by a white man. And he says, come in, and he grabbed me around the shoulder and took me to the house, and we sat down. He says, I am still sitting frozen. And he said it was Sunday, and it was the maid's day off, so the wife is cooking lunch for them and preparing food for them to take on the road. And he said, I was just blown away. And he said, I knew at that moment this message of Baha'u'llah was from God, because it could not have been put together by human beings. And for those of you that know, it was hand of the cause, Mr. Banani and Mrs. Banani. And he said, the white man had been my boss, he'd been my master, but he'd never been my friend, and he'd never had embraced me. You see, no amount of words could have communicated that. Their genuine love for him was exhibited just in that hug. He knew this was from God and became a Baha'i and has now raised 2 generations of wonderful Baha'is in Kenya, just from that one act. So when we say love, it has to be so genuine. It has to be so real. And it has to be transparent. And you should be at the head of the line. Because Baha'u'llah has given you such a gift. Don't be unconscious. Be conscious. And know that everyone you come in contact with will be affected by your love. By the genuineness of it and by the purity of it. Somebody else?
All the virtues.
All the virtues. Like what?
Patience, truthfulness, cleanliness, trustworthiness.
And we can go on, right? We can go on.
I think an important one is service. I think it's going on from love, because if you love someone, then you're willing to serve them. So
Give that guy a star. The way you take responsibility is service. Because again, if you read all these things, how many of you here have been through the whole Ruhi sequence? Let me see. Wow. How many of you are halfway through the sequence? How many of you are at all involved in the institute process? Wow. You see, all of that you're gaining would be meaningless if it's not translated into, I can't hear you, action and service, right? That's what our whole life is about. Our entire life as Baha'is is about service. Service to our family, service to the community, service to others. Okay, what else brings us together? I see a bunch of hands.
The arts and music.
The what?
The arts.
Oh, yes. The arts. Yes, yes. The arts. I have often, I do a lot of work with schools, and I often tell the music and arts instructors not to waste the kids' time teaching them stupid songs. Really, my kids used to come home like, what is that about? There's some weird song. The arts are a primary tool for change. When you think about how many artists of every kind, whether they're performing or visual artists, how many of them in history have suffered? And why have they suffered? It's because they've wanted to use their art to communicate change. Artists are often at the head of the arrow of change. Their hearts and souls are open, and they communicate change. There are many of you here who have incredible creativity. Your ability to write poetry and express yourselves through poetry. Your ability to use music. Your ability and all the art stuff that you see around. We have only started. We're only at the beginning of understanding of the arts as a force of unity. In 1985, there was the huge famine in Ethiopia, 85, 86. And when all those Hollywood people came together and they did We Are the World, during one of the recording sessions, there were these Ethiopian women, elderly women who lived in Los Angeles, who were there visiting their children. They asked if they could go in and thank those artists, because they said it isn't that these artists could ever raise enough money to solve the problem of Ethiopia, but the fact that they used their skills and talents to raise awareness about people they don't know, people who live on the other side of the universe from them. And they said when they heard that, even though these women did not speak English, the fact that these artists had done that affected them so much. And you see the arts all over the world as a means of change. So I'm glad to whoever said the arts, because when you go into your workshops, I want you to talk about that. How do the arts bring about change? And how do they bring us together?
I believe you said this several times, but suffering, you touched on it several times.
Say that again?
I believe you touched on it several times, but suffering.
Suffering. Suffering, is that what you said? Suffering, right? Yeah. Suffer. What happens when you see other people suffer? Like those children in Russia who saw, because they had suffered, what did it do to them? It made them more sensitive about other people's suffering. So when you suffer, you become keenly aware of other people's suffering. Let's take one more. There's one more back down here.
Realizing that God's love for us connects our souls together so that, His love translates to our love directly for each other.
That's right. Because in the final analysis, how do we exhibit our love for God? What? By loving our fellow men, right? People around us, right? Because it's easy to say, I love God. Who's He? Does He need your love? Probably not. So the way we show love to God, then we show service to God is by serving humanity and loving humanity. And not just humanity, because it's easy to love humanity. But it's about loving the people who are right around us, right? Because that's the challenge. Because I can love humanity. I love those people in China. They're great. And those people in Mongolia are even better. But those people who live at 7600 Stanton Avenue, which is my home, that's where the test is. Nothing wrong with those people who live there, by the way. I don't want you going home and telling them. So then I'll just go ahead and read this next paragraph. The standards set by the Guardian apply to the entire Baha'i community. This is the standard we just talked about, taking responsibility and so on, both in its collective life and the lives of the individual members. They hold, however, particular implications for Baha'i youth, who are blessed with the enviable advantage of high energy. Do you have high energy? Flexibility of mind. Do you have flexibility of mind? It doesn't sound like you're sure about that. Do you have flexibility of mind? And to a great extent, freedom of movement. Do you have that? Freedom of movement. I know y'all can move because I saw you last night. We'd see each other and you'd fly across the room. And the fact that you all dragged your bodies here, I don't know how you did it, by planes, by train, by horse, or however you got here. You managed to get here because you wanted to be here. You're not here because your parents forced you to be here. At least most of you. Then the House says, and then I'm almost done. Let's see. The world that Baha'i youth are inheriting is one in which the distribution of educational, economic, and other basic opportunities is grossly unjust. Is what? Is grossly unjust. What does that mean? I want to make sure that people know what I'm saying. It's what?
The injustice is staring you in the face every day.
Every day. Every single day. I'm working with a particular school district right now, helping them create a culture of diversity and inclusion. In this school district, they have 85% of the children are Black and Hispanic. 85% of the teachers are white, suburban women. Can you imagine the disconnect between these two populations? And a good 50% of the children don't graduate from high school. Now, in a community like that, the injustice is staring you in the face. And they were saying to me, in a suburban school, you would never face some of the things we faced. This woman said one day she walked into a school and the principal was running around trying to find this one box that had clothes in it because a child had come to school almost with no clothes on because the adults in the house were asleep when she left. Nobody was there to give her breakfast. Nobody was there to prepare her for school. She just got up in her PJs and just walked to school. You see, the injustice is staring us in the face every single day. And we can be overwhelmed by it, right? Because you can say to yourself, what can little old me do? This is a huge problem. Well, do what you can. Do what you can. How many people are there? 400 and some odd people in this room. Imagine if 480, whatever it is, of you that are here, if each one of you selected a junior youth, a child to mentor. That's 480 more children and junior youth who would have somebody to love them and care for them than there are today. So when you go back to your workshops, I don't want you to talk of theories. I want you to talk about what you can do to acquire this fundamental change of consciousness. Okay? Then the house says, the challenge, is grossly unjust. I have to find that one. Baha'i youth must not be daunted by such barriers. They must not be what? What's daunted? Being afraid. Overwhelmed. Intimidated. All of those things. Because you shouldn't be intimidated because this is so big, such a huge problem. But imagine if you just selected 2 or 3 junior youth or children in your neighborhood, in your community, in your town to mentor, which is what the house is asking you to do. Imagine what a difference you would make in their lives. And then they go on to say, their challenge is to understand the real condition of humanity and to forge among themselves enduring spiritual bonds that free them not only from racial and national divisions, but also from those created by social and material conditions, and that will fit them to carry forward the great trust reposed in them. Wow. What an amazing challenge the house puts before you. You know, one of the ways you can begin, there are many youth here. How many of you are here for the first time? Lord have mercy. Can you stand up so I can see you? Woo. Wow. How wonderful. Welcome. And those of you who have been here before, I want you, as an awakening of your own consciousness, make sure that not one of these people that stood up will leave here having felt lonely and isolated. That is your first act here of consciousness. Remember, this is their first time here. If you see anyone sitting alone or looking lost or looking lonely, go up, introduce yourself, talk to them. Because I don't want to hear a single youth leaving here without some of that forging that the House of Justice says. That love, that bond. The bond that you develop between yourselves will be one of your greatest tools of service. Your greatest tool. And you know what? It will last for the rest of your life. This bond that you develop here, don't take it lightly. Because it will help you awaken your own conscience. So when you wake up every morning, you can ask yourself, what is it that I am going to do today that's different than what I did yesterday? You know, somebody asked Abdul Baha, Baha'u'llah says, you should bring yourself to account each day. And Abdul Baha told this person, what that means is, at the end of each day, you should think of all the bad things that you did and pray to God that you won't repeat them the next day. And you think of all the good things that you've done and pray to God that you'll do them better the next day. Because he said, The soul of man is like a bird that is always flying in the atmosphere, always in search of its creator. And he said the ego is like the hunter, always trying to devise ways to bring that bird to the ground. So our life is a struggle between our ego. What do I want? What do I feel? What is it? What is in it for me? And a balance between that and saying, my purpose in life, the reason I wake up in the morning, the reason I go to bed at night, the reason I take care of myself is because I'm charged with carrying forward an ever-advancing civilization. The reason I draw breath on this planet is to firmly establish the principle of the oneness of humanity. Because Baha'u'llah says that the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. And you are the soldiers of unity. You march to the order of unity. Everything that you do, every career that you select, every place you choose to live will be for the purpose of putting in place the most pivotal principle of the teaching of the Baha'i faith, which is what? Unity. To bring about the oneness of the human family. There is nothing you can do in your life that is more important than that. To expose the teachings of Baha'u'llah to your peers. You know, when one of the members of the House of Justice, Dr. Peter Khan, was here a couple of years ago, he said, you know, when you find a good shampoo, you can't wait to tell your friends, oh man, you have to try this. It is so great. You have to, ever since I've used it, my hair has been so different. Oh, this lipstick, you have to use this lipstick. None better than this, right? We don't even think about, oh, this CD. Oh my God, have you listened to the CD? It's real easy for us to share something that we're excited about. And what more exciting thing is there than sharing the message of Baha'u'llah? Manume!
Let's hear it one more time. One more time.